Hello everybody, this is Steven. I'm going to do a little demonstration here on the next stage of this Rembrandt painting right over here. If you've watched the last video, I did a wash-in and the basic drawing and placement of everything for this particular self-portrait by Rembrandt. So this time we're going to go into a little more opaque paint, kind of build up the surface and get some of the exact colors in. Right in place. So first, I just thought I would go over my palette first, and I'm painting all this in acrylic, of course. And what I have is I'm using a paper plate for my palette, which is nothing fancy. You just need a mixing surface, so just to make it a lot easier, and I can throw these things away when I'm done with them. So what I have here is I have a titanium white. This is a Liquitex soft body because Rembrandt used a soft white for the mixes that he didn't want to get built up too much that he would be using for his tints or what have you. And then over here I have my yellow ochre, which is just the this Winsor & Newton brand, which is pretty cheap. And I've mixed into it a little bit of Hansa yellow, which is in this case cadmium yellow deep hue, but it's an aerolide Hansa yellow, transparent. So I mixed a little in there because I found that a lot of the yellows that Rembrandt was working with, it was an earth yellow, but it was a lot more yellow than this yellow ochre pigment is by itself, so I just mixed a little of that yellow in there to give it a greater range for some of those more golden tones. And then right over here I have a red oxide, which again is it's another just a cheap grade of acrylic paint. This is Fundamentals by Creative Mark, so nothing terribly fancy. Just a red earth, which is basically what's used for most of the flesh tones. And then right next to it, right over here, we have just a crimson, some kind of a cool dark transparent red, which Rembrandt was known for using. It was either a carmine or a rose madder, the real stuff, so he'd usually use that for his glazing. And right here we have black, which is basically the blue that Rembrandt used for most of his paintings. There are a few, if any, of his paintings, especially his portraits, that contain any blue whatsoever. All the cooler tones you see are made with grays and mixes of grays. So it's pretty amazing. I've used this palette quite a bit, and it's pretty remarkable all the different types of colors you can get with just these. I just like to take a look at the reference and see if there's any specific drawing errors that I can pick out that need to be addressed since I last worked on it. Now that I'm able to look at it with a fresh eye, there's certain things that jump out at me. So I'll just take a little time and just splash those in real quick. So one thing I'm noticing is that the shape of this hat that Rembrandt's wearing, it angles up just a bit more. And that's a little too flat, so let's bring it up like that. And there's some bands that are going to move that way into the darkness. So we'll take that down. As far as this shape, that looks pretty good. That seems to be fine. His eye is really kind of, let's say right here, the iris. And that's some more fine detail, but I want a general idea of where that is. And over here we have, I don't want to make this too black. Try and use something warmer here. A little red oxide. Yeah, it's a little better. So that looks good. That general shape's pretty accurate. See a little red in there, so I'll just dab that in a bit. Yeah, this turbine it comes up a little more, but I can overpaint that. The one thing that really is jumping out at me, and this I noticed after I finished the first video, was that I had had a bit of a discrepancy in the edge of the of his jacket here. So it actually comes out like so, and the collar goes up into this area. So just take a little more, get something darker in there, and just establish that. And right here is really where the jacket comes out. Check my angle. That looks pretty good. I'm going to be painting into that area anyway, so it really doesn't matter at this point. So this isn't by any means a final statement. I just want to give myself just a note, just an indication here, and bring that over there like that. Yeah, so that's just a little note to myself. But right now I want to get in these grayer tones, because right now it's just a black wash over this sort of lightly pinked primer that I had for this panel. So I just want to put in a more accurate color at this point. So I've mixed up a black, added some white to it to gray it out, and add a little yellow ochre because it kind of has a greenish tint to it. I'm just going to place that down and see how it looks. I'll just lay that down. First of all, I just want to make sure that it is the correct relative value. Is it too dark? Is it too light? Or is it exactly what it needs to be? And from what I'm seeing, it looks like it's actually a bit cooler and a bit darker. So I'll just mix up another bit of gray. It's a little cooler, just a tad darker, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to put that in. And right now I'm putting it in really directly. It's very opaque, and I understand that when I look at the actual background and the reference, that there's a lot more variation. For instance, this back here gets a lot darker. So I'm going to start to make indications of that, but later on I can do washes and different things to really make these edges and transitions a bit more subtle. But right now I'm just trying to get a coat of paint on here, basically making some kind of statement so that I can adjust it later. That's really one of the important things that I know I can't hear enough, is it's better to make a wrong decision and fix it later than to be afraid to make a decision and just stay still. So just knowing that I can amend this, I can fix it, really gives me a little more confidence to kind of dive into it. So this area that I'm at right now, that definitely warms up a bit. And it almost looks like it has a bit of red in it, so I'm just going to give that a shot. Looks like the sort of color that would happen if you mix a little burnt sienna in with black. But currently I don't have burnt sienna in my palette, so I just added a little red oxide to that mix. I don't know for sure yet. It still looks like it needs to go a little cooler. And this black that I'm using is ivory. It's not the lamp black. I'm sorry. That I believe Rembrandt was known to use, and that's a very, very dark, very cool black. So, but for all intents and purposes, I'm pretty sure I can get what I need with the colors that I have. At least get close. It's not gonna be that big of a difference. The most important thing is that I capture the main idea, which is that relationship of the light to the dark and the effect of the light hitting this turban in the face and filtering down to the page, which is further away. This sort of wonderful halo of light that he sits in. So I figure if I can get that basic idea, that will be the most important thing. So just try not to get too hung up on little things. Little things meaning whatever is secondary to the main shape value idea, especially in this case, since that is such a powerful force that I've seen in so many of Rembrandt's paintings. So I'm just working my way up. I was just zapping in some notes here, just so this is integrated too. That's the background showing in down here. So it sort of references this, and I'm looking to see if I can put that note in anywhere else. And so there's some right here. And really, it doesn't matter so much whether the actual color note that I'm placing down is an exact match of the reference. The important thing is that I'm replicating the relationships of all the light and dark values, the warm and cool colors, the local colors, whether it's yellow, red, or a blue, or in this case a gray. And it will hold together and it will ring true if all of these are properly related. Now I'm just stepping back to take a look at this edge right here, and this gets pretty soft, so I'm just gonna rub that back with my finger and know that I can come back in with the dark. I'll need a better transition there of much lower value. Oops, it's a little too high in intensity or chroma, so I'm going to grade that down a bit so you can get something a little more tame. And that's too light, so a little more black. Well, still has way too much white in it. But that's okay, because I can do a little mixing directly on the painting. I'll just paint some black into that to cool it down. And then add a little yellow ochre up here because I see it starting to warm up and turn more into a green near the top here. All these little notes, little variations within the gray. just add to the richness of this area here, whatever it is. It's this wall, perhaps wall of a prison cell, but it reads as one shape, but there's all these wonderful little variations in the color. There are some red spots, which kind of register more as, I guess, a dark brown, but they are important too. So I'm just going to lay some of those in. They're a little bit darker than that, so I'll just mix another color that I think is right and put it on, and then I can adjust it later. So that is a bit overstated, but it's better to overstate something than to understate it, because it can always be knocked down. It's much easier to reduce the intensity of a color mix than it is to try and increase it when you place down a gray, especially when painting wet into wet. But in this case, since this is acrylic, it dries pretty quick, as you probably know, so in a lot of cases I can just paint right over it, and because of the acrylic polymer vehicle the pigments are suspended in, it tends to level out, so it doesn't add too much unwanted texture, which is nice. It's a nice touch, but also you do sacrifice some wet on wet capabilities, some of your blending, having more control over modifying your edges, because you really have to jump on the edges right away as soon as you place it down. It doesn't really give you a lot of time to work one thing into another. Need a more powerful gray. Remember back in school, my painting teachers talking about black being considered another type of blue, and it's from studying paintings like these, anything that's done in this sort of limited palette where blue is used in place of black, that based on the relationship of everything to everything else, just the lack of any kind of blue in the other pigments, it really makes some of the grays sing, the more pure grays, and they, in some circumstances, will look startlingly close to blue, depending on what they're placed next to. And that's why the relationship side of things is so important. So I'm just gonna get rid of the uniformity there. Knock everything down. I'm going to take a look and see if that is a pretty good relative value. And it's looking pretty decent. At least I'm going to stick with that for a while. And this shape has shown me that this turbine needs to come up a little bit more. Just having more of a critical eye, and I see that there's adjustments that need to be made. So sometimes I'll just mix up a really thin wash, and I'll just draw a line restating what the boundary of this shape is. Just the general idea, knowing that I'm going to cover over it eventually. And I'm going to have to work back in between that and the background before I get that settled. I think I'm going to put in just a few color notes, just so I have a better idea try to get that basic relationship established right away. That way when I go with my heavier layers, I will have a general idea where they should go. So, get this really light yellow, which occurs in a lot of this, but it's grayed down in a lot of these circumstances, or in a lot of these areas where it's placed. So I'm just going to go a little brighter than it really is, and stop right on that edge where the shadow is, and soften that so it grays out. As you can see, I'm trying to get what Ted Seth Jacobs would call the cut of the light, which is where that shadow begins. And when I look at the reference, the shadow side in the wall cuts like this, and it comes over the turban and around to this shape here on the forehead and wraps around. So I want to make sure that that is consistent, that follows, that there's a nice sweep of the shadow right there. So I don't want to go beyond this point. That's where the transition and the terminator of the shadow exists, over there somewhere. Just want to make sure I don't get any of that light value over there, because it doesn't belong there, because it's much too light for anything in there. So try to work my way up, get a little more light, and that's a little bit too much. Don't want pure white. I get to this part right here, and just quickly put that in and soften that out. And then this comes up and then wraps over. Just wipe that back. Oops. Use a little water as an eraser there before it dries. There we go. And now I'm going to take a look. This actually doesn't dip down as much. It's more of a straight across type thing. It's just pretty solid. And I'll have to cut back into that, but that's pretty good. Pretty good general idea. I'll just put a little yellow color note right there. And then just soften that up if I can. So a lot of this, you'll see I'm kind of going outside the lines in a lot of cases. But that's okay, because I have it in mind. I know that I'm going to be going back over all of this. So it's okay if it goes a little outside, because I'm going to be reining it all in near the end. I just have to make sure that I have to time it all. I have to pace myself, I suppose. And also just the big realization that for at least 3/4 of the painting, you can expect something to not look that good. It's usually that final quarter which requires sticking with something for a decent amount of time before it starts making sense visually or starts looking like something. So it's something that used to be very frustrating to me. So I was frustrated that it didn't look exactly right near the beginning, and there's really no way to determine that, because it's a process of putting things together. So sometimes you can't always see that far into the process, and so it's okay to just let it look kind of rough for a while. And the more paintings like this that you get under your belt, the more you start to see the pattern. You start to get more comfortable with it not looking spectacular all the time. So right now I'm just putting in some of those grays in the lit areas of the hair. Trying to just make the best approximation that I can. To see where they get darker as they move away from the light, or because they're not gray. Now I see that I need to get back in there. Just put some of those darks back in. I'm finding it's a little difficult to move the paint around, as it's a lot less fluid. Just to indicate some of those darks. There's a big patch of dark right there. It's a warm dark, and I'm not going to get too much into that. That's too light, and I'm starting to gray things out. I need some pure black here. I've got to be a little cautious. Wind that up just a bit with some crimson and some yellow ochre. Let's bring that down. Then a nice strong brush stroke. See how all this matches up, how the dark gets its way into the hair, into that shadow right there, and just kind of wiggles its way around. But it's all basically one shape, which is an excellent simplification tool. Helps the statement to be much more bold and direct. You can combine as many of these dark shapes, as many value shapes, I should say. Just something old illustrators used quite extensively to make sure they got that visual message across. And yeah, if you ever look at Dean Cornwell, N.C. Wyeth, Harvey Dunn, any of those guys, they had a very excellent handle on combining those masses. And this edge is kind of softened a bit and rounded off. And bring that down. So now, as you can see, it's starting to get much darker in the right respects. This might, it's probably not the best idea to be going so dark so soon, but one, it's going to help establish that even more. There's kind of a little dark line around here to be accentuated once the heavier paint goes over. So it's okay if I get back into it, because that's going to be covered. And I just got to make sure I am always stroking downwards to get rid of the glare on this. It's going all one uniform direction. Sort of soften that a little bit if I can. Yes, this is one of the best tools that you get. You can't find this at an art store. Nothing beats the good old Digit, where you need a quick blending tool when you got paint on your brush. So it's part of the reason why I like Rembrandt's palette, because with the exception of lead white that he used, which I'm not using, all his colors are basically dirt, earth colors. So are non-toxic. It doesn't matter if it gets on my hands. So that's a nice thing. I like being able to work with materials that I know aren't going to poison me, which is a comforting thought. I mean, painting's complicated enough anyways. I don't want to have to think about getting poisoned. Plenty of other reasons to be worried about that. Okay, I'm starting to dry out a little bit here. Trouble is that this black is really heavy. It's kind of gummy, but it's okay though. Can make it work. I guess that's part of the fun of this whole Rembrandt project I'm working on, is trying to see not only can I paint a successful imitation of one of Rembrandt's paintings and replicate the techniques, and see if I can do it with acrylic paints, which obviously weren't available to him at his time, and use some of the quick drying properties to see a painting to completion that would have taken perhaps weeks or longer. And also using quick drying properties that don't require lead like he used. But not just that, but also I wanted to see if I could do it with relatively cheap materials. I guess in a way to kind of prove that it's not always about magic paint or magic recipes. It's mostly in what you do with it and where you put it that really matters. It's kind of like guitar players spend thousands and thousands of dollars on amplifiers and guitars and all sorts of effects and things to try and replicate a specific sound, when in reality most of the sound is in the player's fingers. It's not necessarily the instrument or what equipment they had, but how they used it. I find that crosses over into painting as well, and I'm no different really. I spent a long time trying to figure out what was the secret, because I wanted it to be something simple. I wanted a shortcut, and of course, for all my studying, much to my chagrin, I realized that there really is no secret formula. The secret is that there is no secret. The formula is like anything else. You just put in the time and you get familiar with whatever you're using, and you learn your own way to express what you need to through it, and be willing to do anything necessary in order to achieve the desired effect. Rules have been internalized. Then there's the learning to break them properly. Otherwise, you can get really, really rigid and say, you know, this is the only way to paint in watercolor or in oil or even in acrylic. You can't do that because that's an oil technique. You can't do that because that's a watercolor technique, and that doesn't work for this, which is really just a bunch of nonsense. Basically, just use anything you can, anything you need to, in order to achieve what you want. So I mean, there's really nothing special about these brushes. The brushes are fairly cheap synthetics that I'm using right now. I mean, just a few bucks. So nothing really spectacular. I'm sure Rembrandt was probably the same. From a lot of his paintings, I can tell that he probably used really beat up brushes. I mean, they weren't pristine and finely shaped like some people, but that's really important to some people because they rely on those well-shaped brushes to achieve their edges and get things in one stroke. So it all just depends on what you want. But I digress. Just trying to keep from rambling here. Get back on point with the painting. And one of the main things that I'm noticing is that from the reference there is a gradation, just a very slight gradation in color, going from kind of a bright white, yellowish white, down to a more yellow, ochreish, golden skin tone, and it warms up as it moves downwards and towards the shadows. So I'm going to try and see if I can get that gradation established just very simply, not trying to worry about paint quality at this point. That's still pretty far off. That kind of comes at the end. So right here I have some sort of golden type color moving this way, and then it curls down around underneath the turban there, and then it stops. It gets much darker and more orange. So now I'm mixing my yellow with a little bit of red oxide, and value wise looks like it could be a bit lighter. So let's add a touch of white. Alright, now let's see what that looks like. Bringing up the side of the face. Try to soften these edges if I can. Really subtle. Just going to do some angles here. I don't want to get too caught up in all these little wrinkles and things, and I could, but I have to remind myself that I can get a lot of trouble and lose that direct cut of the light from the block in. That really makes this thing hang together. So I just have to use a little restraint. Now I can intensify it a little bit as it moves down, so it gets a little darker, but it gets more chroma, more saturation. as it starts to move down the side of the face. And there we go. Okay. Just soften that. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now, I'm not too worried about it being a little light at this point, because I can always darken it down with a glaze, and that's going to add some richness to it, so I don't mind if I have to do that. That will be alright. Yeah, here we got some more reddish type stuff that is happening. It's not that dark, so we're just going to light it up with that previous mixture that I used over here. Just modify it a bit. Just gotta make sure I don't get too caught up in those little things. Gotta figure out where that eyelid is. Let's just suppose it's right there. Kind of coincides with the top of the nose in light, so put that there. It's a lot lighter than that, of course, but I just need to figure that out, because that comes down here, and then boom, there's that. There's that shape, which is right above the eyelid, and so the eyelid actually comes more down there. Well, it's going to do away with that for a second and be willing to move this over. So right now I'm not quite sure exactly where it needs to sit. I'm going to continue to put my tones in, nevertheless. It's still pretty safe. I'm not making any huge mistakes. This area in here I'm going to have to go back into, but currently it's alright. I have the general space where it needs to sit, but I haven't determined where exactly it goes yet. So I'm just going to take it easy. Realize I may have to adjust that shape. That's alright. So I'm going to move to the more redder tones, and that's way too dark. One of the tricks about painting, well, it's not a trick, but I guess one of the things to keep in mind when painting flesh tones is that the values are very similar. The lit side to the lit side, especially, that they don't change a lot. The only shifts that really happen are color shifts. So just being mindful of that. There's very subtle effects that happen just from shifts in the color. And that's what lends to a lot of richness in skin tones found in a lot of great master paintings, from the Dutch masters all the way up to the more virtuoso painters. So I'm definitely seeing some darker reds going on. Because in this, Rembrandt's getting old. He's got a little more wear to his face, more character. You can tell he's been through, he's been through some stuff. I think at this point, I don't know if this was when his wife died or what, or if he was having financial troubles at this point, but He's starting to wear a little bit, which is great because it's much more. It's such a better thing to paint. Painting smooth faces can be it can get kind of old after a while. You can imagine a lot of the magazine illustrators probably got tired of just painting really smoothed out faces of pretty girls for advertisements after a while. Or maybe they didn't, but just not quite as interesting or challenging as some craggy, weather-beaten face. That shows much of his experience through all the lines. It's like an old mountain or an old tree. It's like a person's story being worn on their face. Think about the quote by Oscar Wilde. Said that a man's face is his autobiography, and a woman's face is her work of fiction. Sorry, ladies, but there's something to be said about that. The fact that I really don't like the idea of aging or getting all wrinkly. Sometimes I wonder if maybe if it could be due in part to the fact that maybe we don't like certain parts of our lives to show, especially on our face. Some things we much prefer to hide. Seems like for a lot of us, reality doesn't seem to suit us too much. Much rather pretend. At least that's what it was like for me for a while. Up. There we go. I have a little more confidence as to where things are. It's coming together pretty nice. Get some of these grayer tones in here. Lighten that up a bit. Gotta work fast because this paint's drying. Oops. It's okay to say oops. Yeah, if you're an artist, you'll say oops a lot. That's not the sort of thing that you want to hear, say, a surgeon or a dentist or even a tattoo artist say. In that case, it's really important to get things right the first time. But the nice thing about this is that if something goes wrong, you can always go back and fix it and make it better. And that's one of the things I just love about painting, is the flexibility that it offers. And for somebody like me who kind of has a perfectionistic streak, it's very good for me. Good to break me out of that sort of crazy Perfectionism can be paralyzing, and it's not helpful to me when it keeps me from working at something. Perseverance is key when it comes to, well, just about any venture. Because very rarely is it going to be exactly right the first time. I mean, and furthermore, I mean, even if you did get it right the first time, it's almost a disadvantage, because then you don't know how to fix a mistake when something does go wrong. Sometimes a good idea is to, if you're working on a painting, purposely wipe something out or mess something up, and then figure out how to get it back. Because if, for instance, if I'm just relying on happy accidents to pull me through, then I really don't have a lot of control over the process. I'm just, hoping I get lucky. And of course, luck is part of it, but the harder you work, the luckier you tend to get. Okay, splash right there. This is starting to look pretty good. It's looking a lot better. Definite improvement. Figuring out a little red note right in here somewhere. The important thing to remember is that the most lit spots, the highlights, check an angle, that comes down to right here. With respect to highlights, they don't have to be pure white. In fact, it's better if you can keep them from being pure white. They just need to be brighter than anything else. And the only time to use pure white is when the surface is so bright that it basically washes everything else out. And so right here, I've mixed some yellow ochre and red oxide with the red oxide kind of dominating the mix. That way it works for the nose, because there's a lot of red tones in. There's a lot of blood situated in the nose area on the face. And it's good to remember or keep in mind where those areas are. Those areas where the blood shows through more readily. Or like, I think the eyelid is kind of over here somewhere. Just splash it right there for a second, and I rub that down to burnish it almost, so it's not quite so strong. Is that not too bad? Okay. So as we work up towards the top of the head, I have to use that same highlight color, that really light pink, that white with all that red mixed into it. If I was to use that right up here at the top of the head, it wouldn't ring true, and actually I did, just to show that it wouldn't. What I need to do is I need to mix another bright light, but this time with the yellow dominating, because it's going from red to yellow up to the bright white. And so I have to work that in, so it's a gradation that makes sense. that just because an area is the same value doesn't mean it's the same color. All the highlights are not going to be the same color, because all the highlights have color in them, they're not just white. There we go. That looks a little better. I gotta get some more orange color on the side there, because that's the transition to the shadow. So, something to this effect. Just for grins, we'll splash a little mark there, just to indicate that brow going. Highlight there and there. Just trying to find places where the color I've mixed can go. That way I don't have to keep mixing over and over again. This is a more yellowish highlight, which fits right in here. That patch I was looking for. And can I get it to mix a little more, to connect up? Just need a little more white in that. Okay. There we go. Knock that down. There we go. Now, bring this down like so. Just get a close-up of what I've been doing up in that face area. I think it's important to show some of those transitions. From back here it looks pretty, yeah, see there's my reference over there. So let's just zoom it in if we can. There we go. As you can see there, there's a lot of different tones. You can see where the yellow shifts and it gets to a more of an orange as it moves towards the shadow side, and moving downward, see the catch lights and how that whole bottom mouth part is all in shadow. Nothing there is a lighter value than anything up in the lights, and how it's starting to get a little body to it, which is a nice effect. But you have the effect of the light, which is key. So you can already get a indication of the lights here, even though I haven't put the darkest darks in. And that's really the key, is you want to see that start to read. And when that does, you basically know that you're on the right track. So that's very encouraging. So now, I'm just going to zap in some darks. So I really don't know how you zap in darks. It doesn't really make a sound, but I like to think that it does. So just going to make, and these are just more approximations. These are not final decisions by any means. It's just a closer guess, because I have more things in place. A few more things in place, which means I can try and figure out where they go. I'm just going to sneak right up on this eye structure. Try to enclose that shape. And then there's a little water on this, so I can get a clearer line. And I'm using a darker reddish color. It's just some black mixed with a little yellow ochre and red oxide, red ochre, whatever you want to call it, earth red. And since it's flesh, that's going to be pretty good, especially for these light areas, because when the folds push together, the edges are semi-transparent. And if you ever held a flashlight against your hand, when the light starts to go through the translucency of the skin, it turns red. So it's a pretty okay color to pop in there. And in this case, it's alright because it's going to get much darker later on. So it's always a good rule of thumb to, especially for painting like this, it's okay if you get a little warm in the dark areas. You can always cool it off later. There's that. Pull that part off. Now, I'm not touching this right here because it would be going too dark. So I want to leave all that alone and work more into this ear area. Just start to indicate a few things, but nothing too crazy. I'm just trying to push the values back into their rightful place. Probably not going to be quite dark enough for over here, but I just want to get prepared for placing that other eye. That's actually some of the most skilled painting that you'll see Rembrandt doing. Is all this stuff that goes on in the shadow, because it's doing a much harder job than the stuff in the light. It's always the elements in a picture that are purposely trying to not draw attention to themselves that are always the much more difficult to do. It does tend to be easier to do something bright, bold, and flashy than it is to put in something subtle. So right now I'm just popping a little black in those shadows just to further define it. I'm just going to pop the iris in. That way I can have a step back and see if I've totally botched the placement or not when I step back and look at this. Right now I'm just trying to pop in some darker notes. Not trying to get too fussy about it, knowing that this is not the final statement. There are layers to go. If I get this part accurate, that's a bonus, but I'm going to paint over most of it. I want to get that lovely texture that Rembrandt was very interested in, and I'm interested in too. That's what I like about so much of his paintings. That he knew how to manipulate paint extremely well in a way that's very natural looking. It's not mechanical like a lot of Dutch painting tends to be. It's very lively in its paint surface. So I'm just trying to keep that stuff soft. Just tickle in some stuff, just a little mist. And in some cases, some of the stuff I've learned, pencil drawing is very helpful here. To just mist things in, or ghost them in, as one of my old teachers used to say. Good old Cameron. Okay, so the thing to remember is where, taking a horizontal plumb line from the corner of that right eye, where does it line up with? It's just a little below the top of the light here. So realizing that this is there's an angle going on here. This is at an angle. Because if you line these both up, it's going to look weird. Because it's not moving with the tilt of the head. Okay, so up here we have kind of a zigzag line for this eyebrow. And that was really kind of nasty looking, but that's alright. Just need the general thrust of it. And I can dilute it way down so I can try and draw some semblance of a line here. There's that there. And it goes like that. Something like that, and I'm sure I'll have to adjust it later. But for right now, that needs to come down more. Okay. I have a general placement for that. It's definitely not perfect and it's not fully settled, but it's an approximation. And that's what most of art or drawing or what have you is. It is a creative approximation. And it's okay, it doesn't have to be mechanically perfect at this point. You just have to get the same sort of feeling. Try and avoid too many hard edges. Oops, it's a little too dark on there. Get some darks down here. Grade out a bit more. Some more construction lines here on the turbine, or I guess lines for the different sections and the indicating how it wraps around. I know it shouldn't be red, but I'll paint over it just as long as it's not messing with the values too much. And I'm gonna knock that down a bit. It's a bit too red, but it's okay. I'm at the back of my brush handle, see if I can scratch out some of that dark. And then, in closing, move down to that hand a little bit and get a kind of a dark orange type color right down there. So there is kind of a reddish gold color on that glove. I'm trying to figure out the placement. It's really down here, and the rest of that is still pretty gray. And yeah, so that's the general idea.